Trish, my wife of 12 years, had just returned home from dropping our two children off at their grandparents' house when the temperature began to drop. The forecast called for a cold snap, and we planned to enjoy the evening sipping wine by the warm fireplace before heading to the bedroom. "Wine," she shouted from the corridor, changing clothes. A few minutes later, she emerged in flannel pajamas, looking not particularly sexy but cozy. She reached for the glass, but I dodged her hand, grabbed her hand, and pulled her towards me. "Worth a kiss," I said. "Just a kiss," she answered with a laugh and pressed her luscious lips to mine. At 37 years old, Trish was still a very desirable woman. Her body remained slim despite having children, and she was proud that she had only gained 5 pounds since her days as a cheerleader in college. At 5'7" she had a naturally slim body, which she kept in shape through a rigorous workout schedule. She had brown hair and green eyes, and when she smiled, cute dimples appeared on her cheeks, giving her a childlike expression. Above, she had C-cup breasts that were well preserved despite nursing our children. Her physical attributes matched her style and positive attitude, making me just as captivated by her as I was when we first started dating. Our kiss dragged on, and I just started to hold her tighter, when suddenly the room was filled with the shrill sound of a ringing phone. "Damn!" I exclaimed and reluctantly let her go. Trish was closer, so she picked up the phone, and from her reaction I realized that she knew the caller. Soon, based on the topic of their conversation, I guessed that it was her friend Gail from church. You see, church was an important part of my wife's life, something she inherited from her parents. I was indifferent about this, which caused some problems at first, although over time we reached an understanding. This meant that I did not challenge her faith or try to interfere with the children, and she reluctantly accepted me. Luckily, she didn't wear her opinions on her sleeve, and unless you knew her well, you wouldn't have guessed her commitment. She also did not bring this baggage into the bedroom, where she could often be a passionate lover. As the call progressed, I realized they were discussing a group of homeless people that the church was trying to help. I had strong opinions about it, thinking it was a waste of time and potentially dangerous, but Trish ignored my concerns and worked as part of the team. I knew Gail was one of the organizers, and her call was probably bad news for our planned evening. "Don't you think about all these things? Blankets and stuff are enough?" I heard my wife ask. She was silent for almost a minute, listening to her friend, before speaking. "I guess, if you say so." Shortly after, the call ended, and with a worried look, Trish turned to me and said, "Gail thinks we need to check on them. You know, because it's going to be really cold. It won't take long, I promise." Barely hiding my irritation, I replied, "They've already been through colder weather than this, and besides, what are you going to do? Give them more free stuff that they can sell for booze and drugs?" "Do you have a heart?" she asked after a short pause, providing her standard answer when she ran out of logical arguments. "You're not going there after dark." "No way," I stated. "Peter is coming, and you can—" she began. "I won't go out into the cold for them," I interrupted, guessing her intention. Peter was Gail's husband and also part of the church group. I knew from past encounters that he had a weak build and a weak character, so he would probably be useless in any physical confrontation, but I had already reached the limit of my patience, and rather than argue, I went to the TV. Trish ignored me as she prepared to leave, and 20 minutes after the message arrived on her phone, I heard the door open. "Stop," I shouted and jumped up from my seat. As I walked towards the door, I saw her standing in the doorway, looking very nervous. Taking a deep breath, I told her, "You're not going there without me. Not with that coward Peter as protection." Trish's face slowly changed into a small smile, giving me hope for a positive return later. She motioned for the couple to wait, and then closed the door as I went to change. When I returned, we walked up to the couple's car, but seeing that they were driving a Prius and not wanting to squeeze into the back seat, I told Trish that we would follow in our SUV. Little did I know that this decision would haunt me later. We drove the distance mostly in silence, as Trish knew not to involve me in the group's affairs. Gradually, the fashionable neighborhoods gave way to less prosperous areas, followed by shopping and light industrial areas, until I saw the elevated highway marking the site of the camp. The road ran above ground level for about 8 blocks, and at one end I saw a cluster of small tents and tarps. The fire burned in a barrel, causing the light to dance on the colored tents, making it look like a party. We followed the small car to the side of the road and then stepped out into the frosty air. "Everything looks good to me," I stated, which earned looks of disdain from the others. "You can wait in the car," Trish said, and deciding that that actually made sense, I nodded and turned away. From the warmth of the car, I watched as they approached the tents, noting that the only sign of people was one man standing by the fire. The three disappeared into camp, causing the hairs on my neck to stand on end, and I counted the minutes as I waited. 10 minutes later, I was about to look for them when I saw them appear along with two figures. One I definitely took to be a man based on his height and build, but the other was more difficult to determine. They stood close to the fire barrel and talked for a few minutes before my wife left the group and walked towards me. "What?" I asked as she stepped into the SUV, instinctively knowing there was a message and it wasn't a good one. "We're worried about those two men. They don't have anything to keep them warm, and it's really cold right now," she explained. "Can't they share with others?" I asked. "It doesn't work that way," she replied, clearly missing the irony of her answer. "So, should we go to the store and buy them things?" I asked, sensing the message. She looked at me without saying a word for several seconds, and then, with slowly measured words, she said, "Gail and Peter, they think it would be better if we took them in at night, one for them and one for us." "You've completely lost your mind. I let this stupidity go on, but not anymore. I'm not going to take a dirty tramp into our house, and you'll be done with this stupidity," I replied angrily. For a moment, there was such an intense look of anger on her face that I thought she might jump over the console and attack me as I sat behind the wheel. I had never seen such an expression, and it scared me while preparing me for the answer I was about to receive. "Never don't tell me what I can do." "Never," she said and fell silent, but any hope that this was the end disappeared, since she was just beginning. "I knew you would say that. You never understood. You're so sure you're right. So sure you understand everything, but let me tell you something, you don't know anything. For the first time, act with your heart and not your thick head. Trust me, you're not as smart as you think." I had never received such a scolding from Trish, and it stunned me, but I still couldn't accept the plan and replied, "I don't want them in our house." There was another pause, and then she said, "Okay, I'll get a hotel room." I wasn't quite sure how to take her message, but thinking that there must be other alternatives, I asked, "Aren't there shelters?" "They're full," she replied, and then added, Gail checked. "Why doesn't the church accept them?" I continued. "It's too late to organize," she replied. "Okay then, we'll help this guy find a hotel room and pay for it," I conceded. Trish took a deep breath, nodded, and then turned back to the others. They talked for a few more minutes. Then I saw the group split up, and the smaller man followed Gail and Peter, while the tall man went with my wife. "This is Jerry," she said as they entered the car, and then added, "Jerry, this is my husband, Dan." "Hi," I said, and received a nod in response. Within seconds, my senses were assaulted by the smell of sweat mixed with tobacco smoke. It was so strong that I could only imagine how unpleasant it would be in the summer heat. Jerry said drive until it's light and turn right. "There's a motel a few blocks away," my wife explained. I obediently followed her instructions, and soon the neon sign of a rundown motel appeared in front of us. I drove closer to the entrance, and soon Trish and Jerry came out. However, they returned in less than a minute, and my wife's face showed disappointment clearly. "No numbers," she announced. "Well, where next?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful, since I understood that we needed to restore our recent argument. "Jerry," my wife asked. "There's a place on 16th Street. Not that far. It's not very good," he answered in a deep voice. I headed to the place he indicated, and along the way I wondered what it must be like if it did not meet the standards of a homeless person. When we arrived, it was even worse than I expected. so dilapidated that I was surprised how it passed city codes. As before, the couple left the car, but returned soon after. The door was locked and no one answered, Trish explained, although I wondered how hard they were trying. What's next? I asked. Look, go to the intersection of MLK and the Turnpike. There are several places there, she suggested. Trish was right that there were a few hotels on the site if my memory was correct, but these were legitimate businesses and I doubted how we would be treated. Of course, at first they told us directly that they would not give Jerry's number to anyone, no matter who paid. I won't stay, and you certainly won't, I told her. I guess try this, she sighed. Look, it's going to be the same, and I'm tired. Let's just go home, I said, accepting defeat. Instantly, a look of relief appeared on my wife's face, and she said, Thank you, it's just for one night. We arrived home a little after 9 and awkwardly walked inside, helping Jerry move his things. Trish, as always a hospitable hostess, showed him the guest room and offered to wash all his things. I was surprised when he agreed without protest, and was also amazed when he accepted the offer to take a shower. After showing him the location of the things in the bathroom, she started the laundry and joined me in the kitchen, where I was pouring a drink. It won't be so bad, she said. Okay, I replied, and then, remembering the poignancy of her words, added, I'm not heartless. Not always, she replied, taking the wine I poured. Jerry stayed in the shower for a long time, which I thought was a good sign, and when he finally came out, he was wearing my flannel pajama pants and my t-shirt. Do you want something to eat or drink? My wife asked. Vodka, if you have any, he answered in his deep voice, taking a place on the edge of the sofa. With what? Food? She clarified. Nothing. Just vodka, he replied. Trish didn't stay long, and when she returned, she had a glass that I noticed had several inches of alcohol in it. I could see that she was deliberately avoiding eye contact with me, probably worried, as I was, about what a drunk homeless man might do. There was a basketball game on the TV, and he enjoyed watching it and drinking until it was over. I need a smoke, he declared and began to rise. He disappeared into the corridor, but soon returned with a crumpled cigarette between his fingers. You better go outside. Trish doesn't allow smoking in the house, I said when I saw the lighter in his other hand. It's cold. It'll be fine, she stated. The man quickly lit a cigarette and took a long drag, and while the smoke filled the room, I carefully examined our overnight guest. I guessed he was in his early 40s, about 6'2" inches tall, and no more than 150 pounds. He had gray hair that almost reached his shoulders, now fresh from a recent shower. He had stubble, which meant he shaved occasionally, and there were no visible tattoos on his body, which I found odd. However, the most interesting element of his appearance was his deep-set eyes, which indicated a hard life. The cigarette quickly ended, but the unpleasant smell remained. Jerry returned to his place on the couch and quickly downed the remaining vodka, and as soon as he placed the empty glass on the coffee table, my wife stood up to refill it. I excused myself and met her in the kitchen, where she was pouring vodka, and asked, Is that smart, giving him vodka? It's just for one night. Let him enjoy it, she replied, looking at me pleadingly. You owe me, I said. Not after your attack, she replied, but I could tell from the look in her eyes that she wasn't completely angry. We returned to our guest and sat down again. Trish tried to start a conversation and find out about his background and family, but it took a lot of effort and she finally gave up. Do you have paper and pencil? The man suddenly asked. Of course, my wife replied happily, pleased that some interaction had begun. Without asking why, she left the room and soon returned with several sheets of printer paper and a freshly sharpened pencil. Jerry took the magazine from the table, put the paper on it, and began to use a pencil, but neither I nor she could see what he was doing. Instead, we focused on the TV, sipping our wine and occasionally casting questioning glances at each other. The minutes dragged on, and although I was intrigued by the man's actions, I was starting to get tired and was about to suggest going to bed when he returned the magazine to the table and then handed Trish a piece of paper. I watched as her eyes widened and a quiet sigh escaped her mouth as she looked at him. She then stood up and walked over to me, handing me the paper and sitting down. Not knowing what to expect, I was also surprised when I saw that the man had created a detailed drawing of my wife sitting next to him. No doubt it showed a very talented hand. The only flaw I noticed was that it made her pajama top wider. "That's really good," I said sincerely, looking first at Trish and then at Jerry. "That's amazing," my wife chimed in. Strangely, our newly discovered artist showed no reaction to the praise. Rather, it seemed that he was fully expecting her. "You've been trained, obviously," I said, now wanting the man to say something. "Yes, a lot of training," he replied. "Tell us about it. Where have you been?" my wife asked. "Mostly on the East Coast. A little bit in Europe," he replied. "When was it?" Trish asked, not happy with his unclear answer. "Many years ago. I don't do it anymore. There's not much opportunity," he said. "Well, you are very talented," she said, seeing his melancholic look. The room fell silent again as I periodically looked at the drawing in my hands. When Jerry finished his second glass of vodka, Trish refilled it with ours. She returned to the seat next to me, and after he had drunk a considerable amount, Jerry again took the magazine, paper and pencil, and began to draw. We waited impatiently, watching him work, knowing now that his occasional glances at my wife had artistic significance. 20 minutes later, he finished and handed me a drawing showing Trish's profile with the same attention to detail. I showed it to her, which made her smile big, and then I placed it in my lap, knowing that both drawings would never be thrown away. "Equally beautiful," I declared. "Beauty is in the object," he replied, and I noticed my wife's tense. "That's true," I agreed, enjoying her sudden discomfort. There was another period of silence, which was interrupted when my wife asked, "Have you studied portraits? Is that your specialty?" "I studied portraits, but my preferences are in other areas," he replied. "Which areas?" she continued. "New," he answered without hesitation. His message stunned us for a moment, although there was no reason for it, since nudes are certainly a legitimate and widely accepted art form. "When was the last time you drew or wrote one?" I asked. For the first time since we met, he showed emotion, laughing for a few seconds before answering, "It's been a while. There haven't been many inspiring objects." "Probably not," I replied, and noticed that his eyes were now fixed on my wife. It took a while to sink in, and then it dawned on me that he really wanted to draw my wife naked. The drawings he had made must have whetted his appetite or brought back memories, because there was now an obvious eagerness in his expression. It was a crazy thought, made even weirder by the circumstances. It's one thing to go into an established studio with a practicing artist with an impeccable reputation, but we were dealing with a homeless man, albeit a very talented one. A glance at Trish showed me that she was unaware of the man's interest. I could hardly contain the smile that tried to appear on my face, thinking about how I would tease her, especially considering everything that happened this evening and the scolding I received. Seeing her initial reaction will be fun, and over the next few days, I will be able to mention it and enjoy her discomfort. The more I thought about it, the more I felt it was owed to me. "Maybe you can find someone you're too talented to ignore. You know, being an artist," she said, providing the perfect segue if I dared. "What about you?" Jerry blurted out. It was a bold request, completely inappropriate in fact, and despite my mental plans, it took me by surprise. I was in the middle of a sip of wine and had to work hard not to spit it all over the room. However, my reaction was not nearly as animated as my wife's. She sighed loudly and practically jumped in surprise before looking at me for my reaction. I knew she expected me to be angry and possibly throw the man out, so when she saw that I was in control, a look of confusion appeared on her face. It's amazing how fast the mind can work in certain moments, and within just a few seconds I was processing the information. The homeless man's question relieved me of responsibility, and I witnessed my wife's shocked reaction. Now I could initiate follow-up teasing at any time with minimal risk. It was a nice situation, but now that everything was in play, I decided to push a little. "He's a good artist," I snapped. "What? You're crazy. Completely crazy," she declared and left the room. As soon as she left, I looked at Jerry and saw a thin smile appear on his face. No doubt he thought it was us against her, since he did not know about my plan. Trish didn't stay long. She appeared about 5 minutes later, having regained her composure, and took the same place next to me. I kept my attention on my wife, but wondered if Jerry thought her return signaled agreement. Strangely, I sensed more worry than anger in her behavior, and was just about to calm her down when our guest tried again. "Models get used to it quickly," he said. Trish had another negative reaction, although it wasn't as obvious and it stayed put. I was about to suggest going to bed when she startled me by asking a question. "How many models did you have?" she asked. It wasn't so much a question as it was a surprise, as it was harmless. Rather, it was her engaging in discussion. "I didn't expect this." "Too many to count," he replied. "All young girls?" she continued. "No, girls are bad models. They look like girls. Women are much better," he explained, and then added, "like you." Her sharp intake of breath made me look at her, and I saw that she was looking straight at me. We held eye contact for a few seconds, and then in a quiet voice she asked, "Are you serious?" Suddenly, with one simple question, my entire plan was turned upside down. Never in my wildest dreams did I think she would consider the idea. After all, this man's presence was directly related to her church activities, which in itself should have been a deterrent. Indeed, it was so mind-blowing that for a few seconds I wondered if she was playing her own game. However, her eyes expressed sincerity, which convinced me that all this was very real. Now I was faced with a choice: support my wife's nakedness in front of another man, a stranger and a homeless man, or abandon the idea and retreat to the safety of our bedroom. It should have been easy, but suddenly I felt dizzy at the thought. "He's doing a good job," I replied in a voice I didn't recognize. The room went completely silent again, and I felt like at any moment Trish would reach out and hit me. For various reasons, I deserved it, and in a sense, hoped for it. How do you do that?" my wife asked. "The small sofa in the other room will be the best place. You just need to go there, take off your clothes, and lie down," he explained. I expected more discussion, but her answer came quickly as she took my hand. "Walk with me." I felt her handka was shaking as we headed into the living room, which we rarely used. At one end, against the wall, was a traditional sofa with neutral upholstery. While she stood to the side, I arranged 2 pillows for her head and put the rest on a nearby chair. "Sip," she said when it was time to undress, but her hands had barely begun to move before she looked at me with an expression of fear and said, "I can't do this. This, this is just wrong. I mean, no, it's not me." Within a few minutes, I had another opportunity to come to my wife's aid, support her position, and comfort her in our bed. However, again, for reasons that seemed strange even to me, I did not do this. "I think that's fine. He does a really good job, and I'd like to have that," I countered. She looked at me in surprise for a few seconds, and then slowly began to undo the buttons of her top, exposing her bra. Apparently, she had been so nervous about the presence of a strange man that she had decided to wear it, but was now taking a giant step in the opposite direction. I helped her remove the clothes from her shoulders and then unclasped her bra, throwing them both on the chair. Next, her pants were removed, and when she was left in her panties, she turned to me with a scared look. "I'm not sure." "Are you sure?" she asked. "No," I said, and when she sighed, I added, "Give me your panties." Now my beautiful wife stood completely naked, and after one last look at each other, I helped her lie down on her back. She squirmed a little, but when she finally settled down, I knew the time had come. "Ready," I called. I heard movement, and his tall figure appeared, but he stopped at the entrance to the room and beckoned me towards him. "Don't stand where she can see you. It will make her nervous," he advised. It took a little while for the meaning to fully sink in, and when it did, I realized he was probably right. So I stayed behind, out of her peripheral vision, while he walked over to the couch. There were no words between them as he made a few adjustments to her position, and then pulled the chair forward and took the seat, using the same magazine to support the paper. "I'm nervous," she whispered. I was expecting words of encouragement from him, so I was taken aback when he replied, "Do you always shave? The natural look is much more feminine." I half expected her to run away, but she stayed put, and after what seemed like a minute, she replied, "Dan likes it that way." Their conversation ended there, and I watched as his hand moved across the small paper. I wasn't sure how long it would take since it was a more complex drawing than her face, but he finished it in less than 30 minutes. However, instead of giving her the benefit of the doubt and walking away, he pulled the chair closer until it was within arm's reach and shared the drawing. For a few seconds, I decided it was stupid to wait any longer and entered the room. "Where did you go?" she asked when I entered. "I thought I might make you uncomfortable," I said, and after a moment of thought, she nodded. "Here, look," she said and handed me the drawing. Even on a small letter-sized piece of paper, the quality of the work was obvious. It was very detailed and sensual without being cheesy. "Great," I declared. "Can I make a copy?" "I'd like one," Jerry asked. "For what?" my wife answered nervously. "No, I don't think so," I answered firmly. At this point, Trish became aware of her nakedness and began to look between us and her clothes. "Let's let her get dressed," I said, inviting our guest to leave. "Can I have another drink?" he asked as we returned to the TV, and with a nod, I left him to collect the drinks. Trish joined him when I returned, and it was clear that when she moved, she left her bra on. I handed out the drinks, and for the next few minutes, we drank them while I asked the man technical questions about his art. He answered slowly, probably already exhausted from the rush of energy he felt from seeing my wife naked, and after a few minutes I informed him that we were going to bed, hoping that he would go to bed too. However, he seemed determined to finish his vodka, so after receiving a shrug from Trish, we left. Once we were in the bedroom, Trish removed her panties while I undressed, and as soon as we lay down on the mattress, I pulled her towards me. "I think Saint Trish got horny being naked," I teased. It was dangerous territory, completely unknown, but the situation was so unique that I couldn't help myself. "You turned me on," she replied, trying to deflect my remark. "No, you're turned on by being naked. Admit it," I demanded. "I'm ashamed," she replied, trying to hide her face in my chest. Realizing that things were moving too quickly, I said, "Don't worry. These drawings are amazing. I'm glad you did it." "Is it true?" she asked, encouraged by my words, and then showed her concern again when she added, "What if Gail finds out?" "Don't worry, she won't find out," I replied, although I knew it was a risk. We kissed and purred contentedly for the next few minutes, enjoying our closeness, but my thoughts kept returning to my wife's nakedness, especially how easily she agreed. I wanted to know more, but felt that a direct approach might scare her, so I decided to take a different route. "It would be nice to have some more," I said. "What? Drawings?" she asked. Yes," I confirmed. "Nude, not nude." She replied, but when I started kissing her soft neck, she sighed and said, "Really? Do you want me to?" "Do you want more?" "Nude?" she asked instantly. "Yes, nude," I confirmed between breaths. "Do you really want to?" she asked. "Don't think about me. Tell me what you want," I demanded. "I don't know. Maybe, if you like it," she answered, and after a pause added, "Maybe if you want." "I want to," I said when she acknowledged her interest. What do you want it to be?" she whispered. It was a good question, and I was so focused on her reaction that I didn't think about it in advance, so I answered, "Whatever comes to mind." Then we made love. We remained connected and enjoyed the love afterward for several minutes before I collapsed on her side and quickly fell asleep. Later, I felt movement on the bed, and, thinking it was Trish going to the bathroom, I didn't move. However, when I woke up again and realized that she was still missing, I became worried and was about to get up when I heard the door open. I watched as she entered the room, noticing that she was wearing a thin robe that she rarely wore outside the bedroom. When she was naked underneath it, I knew it left little to the imagination, which meant she was probably using it as a deliberate seduction. "What time is it now?" I asked, scaring her in the process. "A little after 3. I checked on Jerry to see if he'd gone to bed," she said, and I felt some guilt in her voice. "Did he lie down?" I asked. "No, he still drinks," she replied. "How long were you gone?" I asked. "Not for long," she answered evasively, climbing into bed. "How long?" I asked, pulling her towards me. "An hour, probably," she answered in a quiet voice. "It's clear. And what happened during this hour?" I continued, feeling that she had something to say. "Look, I mean, you said you wanted me to," she replied in a voice bordering on panic. "Does this mean there is another drawing?" I asked. She didn't respond with words. Instead, I saw her nod several times. Pondering the meaning and possible consequences, I did not answer at first. "You said you wanted more," she blurted out, obviously feeling uncomfortable with the silence. I ignored the many misconceptions in her statement, choosing to focus on what else had happened, and asked, "How did this topic even come up?" I, I think, I mean, we talked for a few minutes, and then he asked if he could," she explained. "So that's it. Did he spend an hour drawing you naked?" I asked. "There were 3, she admitted. "Where are they?" "I want to see them," I demanded, feeling irritated. I, I said he could keep them," she whispered. "Nude drawings of you. Trish, he's very good, and if anyone from the church sees them, they might guess," I replied. "He won't. I mean, I don't think he will," she said. The way she spoke gave me a strange feeling, and deciding that there must be something more, I demanded, "Listen, I'm tired of playing 20 questions. Tell me everything that has happened since you left." "Okay, I'll tell you, but don't be angry," she said and turned to me. When I nodded, she continued, "I went out to see if he had gone to bed, and he was still awake, drinking. We talked for a while, and then he said he wanted to do a drawing for himself, and I said okay. He started the second as soon as he finished the first, then the third." "Did he keep his distance? Have you tried anything?" I asked, feeling that there was something left unsaid. "He wanted me to go to the bedroom," she said in a quiet voice. "Did he touch you?" I demanded. "No, I didn't touch him. He got a little excited, and it somehow came out," she said. "Did it come out? From your fly?" I tried to clarify. "Yes," she admitted. "Did he put it back?" I asked, wondering how she reacted to this incident. "Yes," she answered in a nervous voice. "How long has it been out?" I asked. "I don't know, maybe a few minutes," she replied. Damn, Trish. All these years I thought I was married to an angel, and now I find out that she really is a bad girl," I said, unable to contain myself. "It is not true. Take back your words," she demanded. Luckily, I managed to pull myself together, and, taking a deep breath, I said, "No, that's not true. I take my words back. I'm sorry for what I said, but damn it, honey." I know," she replied. One day, I woke up 30 minutes before my usual time and, swaying, headed to the kitchen to make coffee. Jerry took refuge in the guest room, and since Trish was still asleep, I was alone in the house, thinking about recent events. It didn't take long before I realized that my wife had been surprising me all night. It all started in a homeless camp, where, no doubt under pressure from Gail, she offered to take Jerry in and continued with a series of increasingly risky actions. By far the most amazing event was my wife agreeing to be naked in front of a homeless man. Of course, he was an artist and talented in our opinion, but I would not have expected her to take off her clothes, even for Picasso. I realized that this could only mean one thing. Deep down in her soul, there was a person whom I did not understand as well as I thought. "Good morning," my wife said, walking into the kitchen in her pajamas. "Good morning. Were you able to sleep?" I asked. "A little," she replied, giving me a nervous glance. I felt from her behavior that she was testing my reaction to her revelations. I poured her a cup of coffee, but before I handed it over, I hugged her tightly and said, "I love you." "I'm sorry," she started, but I quickly interrupted her. "Quiet, just let it go," I said. My words seemed to lift a huge weight off her shoulders, and a smile quickly lit up her face. For the next hour, we drank coffee and chatted while waiting for our guest to arrive. Finally, Trish announced that she wanted to clean up and left me to go clean up the living room, collecting the empty bottle of vodka. When she returned, we settled down in the living room to watch TV, and it was around noon when we heard sounds coming from the guest room. "Jerry, do you want some breakfast?" Trish asked when he finally showed up 20 minutes later, still wearing my clothes. "Tea, if you have it." "That's all I need," he answered in a hoarse voice, and then began to cough. He had been in our house for more than 15 hours, drank almost the entire bottle of vodka without eating a bite. I could only imagine the state of his internal organs, but Trish conscientiously stood up to comply with his request. "Jerry, I heard you did some more drawings of Trish last night. I'd like to see them," I said as my wife left. "They are mine," he replied defensively. "I know, but I'd like to see them," I replied. He looked at me for a few seconds and then, reluctantly, headed to the guest room, where he remained for a while before returning with papers in hand. His arrival coincided with the return of my wife, who joined us with his tea as he sat down. Without saying a word, he handed me the drawings and then accepted his mug. I noticed that they exchanged glances, but remained silent while I concentrated on the papers. The first drawing was of my wife sitting naked on the edge of the fireplace with her arms at her sides and a big smile on her face. Apart from the nudity, there was nothing obscene in the drawing, and, to tell the truth, I found it a little uninspired. The second drawing showed her on a couch and was more sexually expressive. Her legs were slightly spread, and her expression showed anticipation. If the artist was accurate in his rendering of the object, then this meant that my wife was in a state of excitement. It was alarming, but I decided to look at the latest drawing before jumping to conclusions. Unfortunately, this one was even worse, as it depicted her sprawled across our dining room table, looking at the artist expectantly. "In what order did you draw them?" I asked the man. "This one is first, then this one, and this one is last," he replied, putting them in the order in which I had looked at them. To me, their meeting now seemed dirty, despite the previous work, and the risk of Trish being recognized was very real. It would be one thing if they were created while we were on vacation, since the likelihood that someone in our circle would stumble upon them would be very small. However, the Cherchestes group actively interacted with the camp, so the possibility of discovering art was real. The drawings were good and the similarities were obvious, but I was biased towards the situation. The question was whether a random person could recognize it. "Jerry, I'm worried that someone will see them and realize it's Trish. I don't want her reputation to be damaged," I said, deciding to be straightforward. "No one will see," he replied, holding out his hand. "Can I leave them for a while?" I asked. "No," he replied. "You must return to camp today. Can I keep them if you stay the night here?" I asked, trying to understand what was valuable to him. He looked at me for a few seconds before asking, "Do you have any more vodka?" "We'll get more," I told him. His hand started to pull back, but suddenly stopped, and he looked at me, asking a tough question. "I want to draw more of her." "Draw Trish?" I clarified. "Yes," he replied. I looked at my wife and saw that she had a strange expression on her face, but she made no attempt to warn me, so I replied, "If we leave the drawings." The man nodded slowly, accepting the offer, and then smiled at my wife. With his attention on her, she quickly became uncomfortable and left the room. Left alone with the man, I decided to find out in more detail the details of the previous night. "Did you enjoy drawing last night?" I asked. "Yes, of course," he admitted without hesitation. "How did it start?" I asked. "She came out, we talked a little, and I said I want to do more. She didn't mind much. I was a little nervous at first, but I relaxed and started to feel brave." "You saw it," he replied with a hint of arrogance. "I see," I said, deciding that I had heard enough and that I needed to process his message. I stood up to find my wife, and Jerry called out to me from behind, "Need some vodka soon. Cigarettes too, if it's not difficult." "Are you going to leave it overnight?" she asked when I found her putting on makeup in the bathroom. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I don't like the idea of him carrying these drawings with him, I told her. But you said he could do more, she said, showing some confusion. Yes, probably. It was necessary to get the rest, I replied, and then, deciding to put on a good face, I smiled and added, I wouldn't mind a few more. Naked? She clarified. Trish, you've already spent almost 2 hours naked with him. I don't think a little more makes a difference, I replied too harshly. She gave me an annoyed look but remained silent, and when she finished getting ready, we decided it would be best if she went out shopping while I stayed with our guest. Just as she was about to leave, Jerry asked her to buy some art supplies for his work, and even provided the location of the store. Then she went out to do her usual Saturday chores and collect the necessary things for our guest. I knew that if Trish followed her usual schedule, she would be gone for several hours, and I dreaded the thought of entertaining a homeless man. Luckily, she had just left when he slowly stood up and returned to the guest room. The door closed behind him, and feeling liberated, I went to my office to take care of business. However, my attention was soon drawn to the drawings lying on the edge of the table. I sat back in my chair and felt a wave of surprise, confusion, excitement, and a little shame as I thought about how much had happened in such a short period of time. Also, as I studied them, I realized that Trish expressed her sexuality on every sheet, especially the three they did when they were alone. Jerry described it as courage, but I knew he was talking about a sexual state, and I wondered what brought her to that state. Was it the indecency of being naked alone with a stranger? Was this a subconscious signal to him? Was there something else about her that could come out with a little coercion? The homeless man was still in his room when my wife returned. I helped her bring the bags, and we chatted while she put her shopping away. When she reached the items from the art supply store, she gave me an awkward smile and then went to place the items in the living room. What do you think of these drawings? She asked when she returned. I felt that she had the courage to ask this question, so I decided to be sincere in my answer. To be honest, I'm a little confused. More than a little, actually. I think they look amazing, but it's just. It all happened so weird, I replied. That's what I think. It was so strange. It's like I don't even remember how it all happened. It just happened, she replied, and I noticed that just talking about it helped her. How did it happen? I laughed. Don't know. One minute I'm sitting there thinking how angry you are, and the next I'm naked, she replied with a giggle. But you're back, I said, wrapping my arm around her waist and pulling her towards me. It was a topic that continued to intrigue me as it was so far from my expectations, and there was no way I could just let it go. Yeah, I just went to check. Actually, I don't know. I don't know how it happened, she replied. You saw him. His dignity, I continued. I didn't expect this. He just kind of showed up, she explained. And, I asked. And what? She answered, although I could see that she was avoiding the answer. What happened? How long was he out? I asked, returning to our previous conversation. She gave me a strange look, and I realized that she felt that I was judging her. It took a few seconds before she said, after I noticed it, maybe a minute, a little longer, and finally he put it back. I remembered Jerry's description of him asking her to come into his room, and I wondered if her verbal interaction with him was related to what she saw. Do you think Gail is having as much fun with her homeless guest? I laughed, suddenly realizing how strange it all was. She started laughing with me and then replied, she called me. They took him back early in the morning. It turned out to be more than they expected. So dear godly Gail isn't as generous as she thought, I grinned. Well, she tried, Trish responded, coming to her defense for a moment before declaring, I need wine. She walked away to make a call and check on the kids while I opened the bottle. I had already taken a few sips when she returned, and after I handed her the glass, she explained the conversation. Fortunately, both were in a good mood, so no urgent gathering was expected. We moved into the living room to continue our conversation, and had almost finished our glasses when sounds from the next room made it clear that our guest was waking up. Sure enough, Just a few minutes later, the door opened and the man appeared. "Did you buy cigarettes?" he asked after a short greeting. "Yes, I'll bring them," Trish announced, and soon returned with a whole block of white fisherette and a new lighter. Her gift did not impress the homeless man, who simply picked up the items and immediately began unpacking. When he finally had a cigarette ready, he took a drag on the smoke as if it were the sweetest thing in the world, and then began to cough for a long time. When the first cigarette burned out, he lit the second and quickly smoked it too. Only then, in a room filled with a layer of smoke, did he turn his attention to us again. "Did you bring vodka?" he asked. "Yes. Do you want to clean up now or first?" Trish asked, trying to guide him. "I'll drink now, I'm fine," he replied. "Okay," she replied, and after a moment she stood up to bring him a glass. On the way, she nodded at the bag at the end of the sofa and said, "Here are your supplies." Jerry remained standing, swaying slowly from side to side, until my wife returned with a glass filled with a half-clear drink. He took a healthy sip, then another, and only then showed interest in things. He took the bag from the floor, sat down in a chair, and began rummaging through his things. Mumbles of approval came from him as he took out the contents and inspected them. There was a sketchbook larger than the one he had previously used, a box of pencils for drawing, a plastic drawing board, a sharpener, and even an eraser. "It's much better now," he said when he finished. "Is this all you wanted?" she asked. "Yes, let's get started after one more drink and a cigarette," he replied enthusiastically. Trish was expecting praise, so his rude answer caught her off guard. She gave me a questioning look, and I decided to slow things down. "After dinner, let's eat first," I said. "I don't need to eat, I'm fine," he replied. When the idea of sheltering this person first arose, I had visions of difficult interactions. Up to this point, I had been pleasantly surprised by the ease with which we communicated. However, the signs began to show, and I realized that I needed to be firm. "You may not need it, but we do. We will have dinner and then discuss the drawing," I told him. "Yeah, okay then," he muttered after a short pause. For the next hour, while my wife cooked, Jerry stewed in his juice. During this time, he drank enough pure vodka to knock out an ordinary person, but he showed no signs of fatigue. When it was time to eat, he refused and stayed in the living room. "Our guest seems to be getting cranky," I told Trish. "You wanted him to stay," she began. "I did it because you went crazy and let him draw you naked, and then you gave him the drawings," I interrupted. My sharp rebuke silenced her, and for several minutes we ate in silence. "Is there any point in continuing?" she suddenly asked. "No, probably not," I replied, pausing to think, and then, after a moment of reflection, added, "No, we shouldn't. I said it was fine to avoid a scene with the drawings, but now that we have them, to hell with it." Trish nodded and then stood up, beginning to clear the table. A few minutes later, with more glasses of wine and vodka for him, we joined the man. He was smoking a cigarette and had just finished his drink, so he eagerly accepted another. Then, after taking another sip, he looked at my wife expectantly. "I'm ready," he announced after a few seconds, and although he was vague, we knew what he meant. "Listen, let's wait a little. It's still early and Trish needs to talk to the kids before they go to bed," I replied, deciding that a delay tactic might work best. Jerry didn't answer. Instead, he took another sip from his glass and then quickly lit another cigarette. I took this as a good outcome and hoped that he would either eventually weaken from the alcohol or accept that nothing would happen. Over the next hour, Trish and I tried to engage the man in conversation, and at times we succeeded, but each time he eventually returned to his sullen self. Verbal communication seemed to sap his energy, which he preferred to save for drinking. Jerry had just entered one of his silent states when he reached out and picked up the sketchbook. He fiddled with his pencils for a few minutes, then opened the page and began to work, humming quietly to himself. In his position, we could not see the leaf, and since he did not glance at Trish, I assumed that his attention was focused on another object. I was curious, of course, and I knew my wife was too, judging by her looks, but Jerry didn't give any hints about what he was doing. "What are you working on?" I finally asked. "Just a minute," he replied, continuing to work. We waited impatiently a little longer, and finally he leaned back in his chair, signaling the end. After he looked between Trish and me, he slowly picked up the album and turned it so we could see. The drawing showed a young naked woman lying on her side on a blanket. The detail was amazing, especially considering how quickly he finished it, and the influence of the art supplies was obvious too. "Wow," my wife responded. "She's beautiful," I said sincerely, and then asked, "Who is it?" "Someone from the distant past," he replied, then added, "But your wife is the best subject." Instantly, my eyes turned to Trish, and I realized that she was trying not to react, but it was clear that she was flattered by this statement. "Why?" I asked, not wanting to let go of the topic. "She's a woman, as I told you last night," he replied. "Yes, you said that," I admitted, now wondering if he deliberately chose this path to try to seduce Trish. I was still processing this thought when he asked her, "Are you ready?" "I'm Jerry, darling," she said, turning to me. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe the man's manipulations had a greater effect on me than on Trish, but now I wanted to see what her drawing would look like with better tools. I looked at my wife, and after we made eye contact, I made it clear that we needed to step away to discuss. We gathered in the kitchen as soon as the man lit another cigarette. "Do you think we should make another one?" I asked. "Why," she answered quickly, "I wish I had one with better paper and pencils. One to keep for myself," I admitted. "What? Are you sure?" I thought. She started before I interrupted her. "Yes, I'm sure," I said. "Okay? Um, okay? What now?" she asked. "Go change, I think," I replied. "I got it," she replied, and I realized that she was confused, but she headed into the corridor. When I returned, I saw a look of hope on the man's face, so I didn't keep him waiting. She went. "To change," I told him, then added, "but only one." I was surprised, but glad he didn't argue, and we waited for Trish in silence. Although it was only a few minutes, each second seemed to drag on for hours until we finally heard her footsteps. Jerry put out his cigarette in the coffee mug we gave him to use as an ashtray and then asked, "Ready now?" "Let me finish the wine," Trish replied, then asked, "Where are we going to do this?" "In your bedroom," he replied. To me, it felt like he was crossing the line into our intimate space, but before I could respond, Trish nodded, accepting his offer. There was an awkward moment as she finished her glass, then she stood up and headed back down the hallway, and we followed. "Lie down on the pillows and cover your legs with the sheet," he instructed when we arrived. Trish realized that the instructions meant undressing, so she obediently removed the covers and lay down on the bed, leaving the sheet covering her from her waist down. This left her breasts on display, and she looked at Jerry to confirm that this was what he wanted. However, instead of giving verbal instructions, he walked to the edge of the bed. All parts of her body were easily accessible, and I was ready to jump forward if he tried to do anything, but he preoccupied himself with the position of the pillows and the location of the sheet. When he was done, Trish lay almost completely naked, with a sheet covering her from the knee down on one leg. "I feel too naked, too exposed," she said in a quiet voice. "Tilt your head back a little," he pointed out, ignoring her remark. Trish did as he asked, and without further words the man began to draw. He remained standing, working, and unlike previous times, I remained in the room, almost opposite my wife. At first she was staring into space, but after a few minutes we made eye contact, and I could tell she was very nervous, but also excited. At that moment, with three horny people so close to each other, I realized that the scene was as sexy as it was artistic. In fact, it intrigued me to see my wife naked in front of this stranger, to see how aroused she was, and turned him on. "You look beautiful," I said after a few minutes, breaking the silence. "Thank you," she replied, and I heard the tension in her voice. There was no more conversation for the next few minutes as Jerry's hand moved across the paper. Then he said something that practically knocked me off my feet. "She relaxed. Go and excite her," he ordered me. I heard Trish gasp as the message sunk into my brain, and for a moment I thought about refusing. But then I felt my legs move, and soon I was at the bedside. "It will be a good drawing," I replied, hoping to calm her down. She gave me a strange look, but I broke off our contact and returned to my place next to Jerry. The room remained silent for the remaining 20 minutes while he finished his work, and when I saw his work, I felt a strange sensation wash over me as I absorbed the raw sexuality that was literally jumping off the paper. "Like this?" Trish asked, standing up. "Very good," I replied. "Damn," she said as she approached me, and then continued, "No one will ever see this. Ever." "Don't you like it?" the man asked, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "This is a good job. I don't know. Too revealing," she said, pulling on her robe and heading towards the door. "We haven't done any drawings showing her butt yet," the man said rudely. "She needs to calm down a little," I replied, forgetting that I had stated that there would only be one sketch. I found her in the kitchen pouring more wine and hugged her. I felt her body tremble and pulled her even tighter. "This drawing was too slutty," she said when we parted. "He was mischievous. I wouldn't call him depraved." "I liked him," I replied. She gave me a puzzled look and then asked, "What do you want?" Instead of answering, I hugged her again, but this time we were face to face and my lips found hers. Reluctant at first, she soon began to actively kiss back, and I put my hand into her robe, finding her breasts. "No, he can see us," she moaned before I started another kiss, suddenly realizing that we were in an open space. I knew it was loud enough for our guest to hear, so I wasn't surprised when he came around the corner, showing no surprise at our actions. I forced Trish to stay still, and she lowered her head onto my chest to try to hide her face. "Satisfy her and I'll draw it," he suggested, then added, "Undress first." "No, Dan, no way," she stated as I walked away and looked at her. "Let's talk." I started when she tried to pull away. "No," she said again, and this time she pulled away. She closed her robe and went deeper into the kitchen. For a moment, I thought about going after her, but instead I took her glass of wine and handed it to her. She took a small sip, looking at me with an expression that I couldn't figure out. It was indifferent, showing neither anger nor pleasure, and after a moment I decided that the best solution was to give her some space. I turned to Jerry, who was still watching, and directed him back into the living room, hoping she would take the opportunity to go to the bedroom. He drank the remaining vodka and lit a cigarette, standing and looking expectantly at the kitchen. "I loved that sketch. She had so much energy," he said, and when I didn't respond, he added, "We need to do more." He didn't seem to understand the whole situation, and at first I was going to ignore him, but then I replied, "I think we're done. She's upset." "Maybe," he replied. "Jerry, would you like another drink?" Trish's voice rang out, and I shuddered. "Yes," he shouted back. Turning around, I saw her standing a few feet away with a full glass of wine in each hand, so I jumped to my feet to retrieve the glasses so she could pour more alcohol for our guest. She didn't seem upset, but since a stranger had just seen us in an intimate setting, I knew it was too early to draw conclusions. "Are you ready to pose?" Jerry asked as she handed him a new glass. I winced, feeling like he was pushing too hard, too fast, but she didn't miss a beat. "What do you mean?" As I said, "When he satisfies you, it will be a good scene," he replied cheekily. It was not just impudent, but downright brazen, and I thought that she would take it as an insult. However, she remained calm, showing no outward signs of concern. "It's dirty. Why don't we just do it?" she answered. He didn't seem to catch her sarcasm and said, "That will be good too. We can do this in the bedroom." This time, instead of answering, she sat on the sofa and accepted a glass of wine from me. Jerry, finally understanding her message, returned to his vodka, while I continued to try to understand her condition. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. "I don't know. What's the plan?" she asked loudly, so the question was directed at both me and our guest. Although I wasn't entirely sure, I assumed she was trying to make some kind of statement, and that it was most likely anger directed at me. Perhaps she wanted to prick me for not coming to her aid and not saying a decisive no to the man. Perhaps now she was going to push me further until I gave up. In any case, her words caught the attention of our guest, who was now looking on hopefully, and I tried to determine the best answer by looking between them. Her eyes were on me, but when I didn't answer quickly enough, she turned to Jerry and repeated the question. Jerry, what's the plan? Well, first of all, why don't you take off that robe? Then I'll drink vodka, smoke cigarettes, and draw you, he replied. Trish thought for just a moment before standing up and letting the robe fall from her shoulders. When the robe fell at her feet, she caught it with her finger and threw it towards the homeless man. He caught it in the air and pinned it between his legs and the armrest. Now naked, she sat back down on the sofa and took a long sip of wine. This made me realize that my guesses about her mood were correct and that she wanted to express her dissatisfaction. However, I found it quite entertaining, so I decided to let things run their course. Jerry prepared his materials and then asked, "Do you want him to please you or have sex?" I expected a bad reaction, but there was none. "Better get busy," she told me almost mockingly. I now knew that my suspicions were correct, and I was portrayed as the bad guy. However, I couldn't believe that my wife would act this way just to make a statement, which made me think that she might be using the situation to hide her own desires. "Better naked," Jerry said. Suddenly, I felt nervous and embarrassed as I began to undress. It's been a while since I've been naked in front of another man, and there's always been this awkward feeling about comparison. Once I was undressed, I turned to my wife, who was stretched out on the sofa with her head on the pillow. Then I started satisfying her and then had sex with her. "Didn't last long enough to do anything," Jerry said. His words were another blow to my ego, and I slowly turned my head to look at him. At some point during our lovemaking, he got up from his chair and undressed. "Jerry, put your clothes on," I said between breaths. My words made my wife peek out from under me, and I heard her gasp when she noticed him. "What is he doing?" Trish asked. "Trying to get excited," I said. "Why?" she asked. "You didn't tell me he was so big," I whispered, ignoring her question, and when she didn't answer, I added without thinking, "He probably thinks he's next." "No, oh, no," she said, taking a deep breath, thinking I was serious. "I can't leave you unsatisfied," I teased, again feeling how strange this all was. "Then get horny again," she replied. We started having sex, not paying attention to Jerry. "I'm ready," he declared, and I saw that his eyes were fixed on my wife. "No, Jerry, no sex. Step back and go back to the chair," I said. "I made the drawings. I gave them to you," he replied, as if he believed he was owed for services. "Listen, if you don't back down, this will end. We're going to bed. No more drawings," I said. My threat made him take a few steps back. "Why don't you make a sketch?" I said to our guest. "No, not now," he replied and came closer. Then, without warning, he walked away, fumbled for a cigarette, lit it, took the vodka, and returned. However, now he was much closer. "Careful, Jerry," I said. "How is she?" he asked with obvious envy. "Great," I replied. Jerry finished his cigarette and managed to lean over to place the butt on the table without leaving his seat. His movements caught Trish's attention, and she turned her head. Her eyes lingered on him a little longer than they should have, and when she returned to me, a guilty expression appeared on her face. It got me thinking about her leaving the bedroom last night, the 3 drawings they made, Jerry's thoughts on his proposal, and how she didn't mention anything about his size. Was there any interest? Deep down in her sexual being, was there a small piece of desire to go further? And with this homeless man, it seemed incredible because they were completely different people in inappropriate situations, but the thought lingered in my head. The more I thought about the idea, the more convinced I became that there was something, even if I couldn't fully understand it. "Let's go to the bedroom," Trish said. I knew she was nervous about Jerry's presence, and under normal circumstances, she would have every right to be. However, the drawings, especially the hidden ones, along with her recent actions, showed something. It made me feel justified in being aggressive and pushing far beyond normal boundaries. "It's okay," I replied, declining her request. "Sit in the chair," she told the man, turning to him. This put her in a position where she was looking directly at him again, and I noticed her eyes fixate on him again for a moment before moving to his face. "Touch it," I told her in a voice I didn't recognize. If the tension hadn't been so high, I would have laughed at her reaction as she quickly looked between me and Jerry's face. "I'm going to bed," she suddenly announced and quickly pulled her hand away. She immediately left the room without looking back, leaving me alone with a naked Jerry. Clearly, I had pushed too hard, and now I had to decide how best to diffuse the situation. "Too bad, man. I was waiting for this," Jerry said. "I thought she might. A little. But apparently not," I replied, and as soon as the words left my lips, I wondered why I shared that thought. "She wants. Her body wants," he replied. I stood up and headed to our bedroom, where I found her in bed, lit only by the light from the bathroom. She was still naked, and I slid over to her and pulled her body to mine. "I feel bad," she said before I could speak. "You feel bad? What happened?" I asked, not understanding her intentions. "No, everything that happened, what we did. Drawings, being naked, sex." She stammered. "I understand," I said. Actually, I wasn't surprised to hear her message. We had gone much further than reasonable limits with the homeless man, and I expected her to stop at any moment. Something inside me wanted to find the limit. However, I knew that if I allowed everything to be perceived as negative, it would take longer to recover. Plus, I loved that she stepped outside her comfort zone, even if just for a little while, and I didn't want her to give up and never try again. So I decided to try to support her. "I do not mind. The drawings are amazing. When we're 90, I'll still be looking at them," I said, and then quickly added, "So what if we're a little different? We did it together." "How will I go to church tomorrow? I'll probably be struck by lightning," she replied, and although she was serious, I started laughing. "You're a good person, Trish. Lightning will never strike you," I said and hugged her tighter. She took a deep breath and then asked, "What do you want?" Instead of answering, I turned her in my arms and kissed her passionately. Luckily, she responded with the same energy, and soon our hands began to roam each other's bodies. "You're beautiful," I whispered when the kiss ended. "What do you want?" she asked, and I noticed that her question had changed from the past tense to the present tense. "In what sense?" I asked, hoping she would clarify. "Do you want more drawings?" She tried. Her question clearly indicated a sudden change of mood, and again I had to consider the relative influence of my interests and her desires. "Honey, I'll take whatever I can get," I declared enthusiastically, and then asked, "Do you like posing?" "Sometimes," she answered evasively. "What about last night? When did you leave?" I continued. "I shouldn't have done that," she replied in a quiet voice. "But you did, and they turned out good," I replied, still trying to convey positive messages. She didn't answer as we continued to make slow love, and as my thoughts swirled, I finally asked, "Did you like it, alone? With the artist?" "I don't know. Don't know why I did it," she replied. "I think I liked it. I saw it in the sketches," I replied, and then added, "How excited you were." "No," she whispered. "Yes, it was there," I insisted. "Enough. Don't make me feel bad." She stammered from underneath me. "It's not bad. That's not what I meant," I said, trying to calm her down, and when she fell silent again, I added, "That was hot." "I'm confused," she sighed. "Why?" I asked, although I thought I understood what she meant. "Why, it's not us. It's not me. My God," I undressed in front of him. "And these drawings. Now, what are you saying?" "What do I think you're saying?" answered her. "This is us. Together. The sketches are incredible, just like you," I said. After a few seconds, I felt a presence and, looking over my shoulder, noticed Jerry behind us with a notepad in his hands. He was still naked and walked to the edge of the bed closest to us, which caught Trish's attention. "No, Jerry, that's enough," she begged, but didn't try to stop me. My first thought was to follow my wife's example and warn him, but after a moment's reflection, I decided to take a different route. Forget about him. Ignore him, I whispered in her ear. My words seemed to calm her down, and we continued our love games. Back off, Jerry, I ordered, wanting to create some space. It's better this way, he replied, but after a moment he let go and retreated. Trish tried to cover us with the sheet, but it bunched up under our bodies, and after a few seconds of struggling, she gave in. As I tried to catch my breath, I heard the repetitive sound of pencil on paper, and while I was glad Jerry was drawing again, I wondered what the finished drawing would look like. We remained connected while he worked, and when I decided to sit up with Trish, the pencil sound stopped. "Do you want me to satisfy her?" he asked impudently. I almost laughed at his relentless attempts to make sexual contact with my wife, but instead of pushing him away outright, I turned to Trish. "Is this what you want him to do?" Her head began to bob before she answered, "No." "Are you sure?" I insisted. I was expecting a loud and categorical refusal, so I was stunned when she replied, "Do you want him?" Our eyes met, and my mind was filled with many thoughts. Will she allow a man to enjoy her if I give my consent? Was she simply passing the decision on to me, thinking that was what I wanted, or did her answer mean something? And finally, would I be able to allow another man, a homeless man, to touch my dear wife? Her eyes widened, but she didn't say anything, and I rose up and rolled over to her side, giving the man her entire naked silhouette. Still not knowing what to expect and whether I could afford it, I barely had time to leave when he started to act. When he finished, I could see on her face that she wanted to have sex with him. And then they had sex. "Are you okay?" I asked, feeling that I needed to say something. The sound of my voice made her open her eyes and turn her head in my direction. She was looking at me, but her gaze was unfocused, which made me wonder if she was fully conscious. "I need to take a shower," she said. I let her pass and waited until I heard the shower start. Then I undressed and went to her. She looked at me with desperate eyes, and I realized that she wanted to know what I thought and what verdict I would give. "Are you okay?" I asked, taking the soap from her and starting to soap her body. "I can't." She began, then paused for a few seconds before adding, "No." "I understand," I whispered. "Why? What just happened?" she asked. "Listen, it just happened. Try not to get upset. We'll talk tomorrow, when he leaves," I said, trying to calm her psyche. In fact, I felt confused too, but I knew now was not the time to talk. I finished washing her, and after we dried ourselves off, we headed straight to bed. We barely had time to cover ourselves with the blanket when a beam of light appeared in the doorway, and Jerry stood in front of us, still completely naked, holding a notepad. "I thought I'd draw more," he said, completely unaware of the dynamics and the violation of our personal space. "No, go away, Jerry," I demanded. He looked at me with a flat expression for a few moments, then replied, "Okay, later then." With that, he turned and walked away, and I pulled Trish towards me. She pressed her back against my chest, and I wrapped my arm around her body as we rested silently. However, after a few minutes, for reasons I could not explain, my hand slid to her breast. Trish's body tensed visibly when I first touched her, but I ignored her reaction and slid my hand under her crop top. "You let him do this," she whispered, and when I didn't answer right away, she added, "Why? I want to know why." Knowing she deserved an answer, I said, "I don't know. Everything just kind of spiraled. I don't know for sure. You let him draw you naked last night." That last part was in my head, but I wasn't going to say it. Unfortunately, like a stream of consciousness, it just came out of my lips. I cringed, expecting a reproach, but surprisingly, when she answered, there was no sharpness in her voice. "It was just a drawing. Nothing happened," she said. "Yes, something happened. You were alone with him for a long time, naked, and he posed for you, manipulated you, and captured your intimacy your sexuality," I replied, and then a thought struck me, and I added, I think it was as close to sex as you can get without physical contact. And you wanted to take the final step. To see it happen, she objected. It was an interesting observation, and I wondered if there might be some truth to what she said. Plus, her behavior so far had been so calm that I knew I needed to tread carefully and try not to provoke. Maybe Trish, maybe there's some truth to that. I don't know. Everything seems so confusing right now, I finally said. There was another silence that ended when she said, "You're horny." "Sorry," I said, realizing that the consequences would be unpleasant. "You will not regret." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused by her intentions. "You don't regret. You wanted this. That's why you're excited. Are you thinking about it?" She challenged me. I, uh, not sure, Trish, I muttered, hoping to find solid ground. "I think you need more," I whispered, trying to find boundaries again. "And you?" she answered sarcastically, but after a few seconds she asked in a strange voice, "Do you want me to?" Her words stopped me, and leaning on my elbows, I looked at her barely distinguishable face. Although her intonation gave me some insight into her thoughts, I couldn't extract any information from her facial expression. "Go to him," I finally said, deliberately provoking. "No," she replied, but before I could answer, she added, "Unless you really want to." Her words caused a wave of mixed emotions, and I was not at all sure what I wanted, but after a short pause I answered, "Go to him." I expected her to refuse again, but she immediately began to crawl out from under me. She quickly got out of bed, almost impatiently, stopping only to put on a robe that I knew would soon be removed. With one last glance in my direction, she left the room, and with a deep sigh I fell onto the pillow. I wondered how a homeless man would take this gift. Will he start withdrawing or just dump her and have sex with her? I knew that at some point I would have to check what they were doing. But, deciding to wait a little, I let 20 minutes pass before I slowly stood up, put on my boxers and t-shirt, and opened the door. As I approached the living room, the lack of sounds puzzled me, so I slowed down and walked in small steps. As I approached the living room, I looked around the corner and saw Trish pleasing Jerry. Although Jerry was at the sexual pleasure party, Trish also seemed quite happy. After looking at it, I decided that this might go on for a while, so I went back to bed to rest. I checked 30 minutes later and found that Jerry was now pleasing Trish. Again, I returned to the bedroom and fell into a state of half asleep when a sound brought me back to full awareness. Intrigued, I got out of bed and started moving down the corridor. More sounds came to me that seemed to be coming from our dining room, and when I approached, I saw Jerry having sex with Trish on the table. "Is everything okay here?" "Everything is fine," he replied indifferently. "Darling," my wife moaned. "Trish, are you okay?" I asked. Several seconds passed without a response, and finally Jerry filled the void. "She's fine. I wanted more." In the quick exchange, our guest did not stop moving, and Trish did not glance in my direction. Perhaps my discovery embarrassed her, or she simply did not want to interrupt her sexual arousal, but I knew that I needed to assess her condition. "Trish," I continued. "It's okay," she replied. Having seen enough, I left the mating couple and returned to bed. My fitful sleep allowed me to notice Trish's attempt to sneak inside, and glancing at my watch, I noted that more than 2 hours had passed since I left them. My thoughts instantly went to how many times this man had taken her. "Are you okay?" I asked to let her know that I was awake. "Yes, I think." She replied just as the aroma of sex mixed with cigarettes hit me. "How many times?" I asked, strangely wanting specifics. "I don't. Some. A couple," she answered vaguely. "Do you want to make love?" she whispered. I instantly turned over and let us make love. The next morning, shortly before noon, we returned Jerry to camp without incident. He left behind a stack of Trish's drawings. After much debate, we agreed that he could keep one. After I left the man, I tried to talk to her and rationalize her thoughts, but the sight of children caused a new wave. This lasted several weeks, and as a result, she decided that it was all my fault, since, in her opinion, I was pressuring her as part of some strange sexual fantasies. In truth, I think she knew it was her own fault, but it was easier for her to blame me than to face her demons. Of course, our sex life suffered, becoming almost a superficial affair for a while. Finally, after a few months, things started to return to normal, and interestingly, she seemed sexier than before. Then there were a lot of unresolved thoughts and emotions that ricocheted around my brain like a pinball. I struggled to understand what had happened in such a short time, and how at one point I wanted Trish to portray the easy girl, which was quickly followed by my desire to see the return of the church-going wife and mother I thought I knew. The reconciliation never happened, but I knew she had a strong point about my involvement, so I decided to just accept the conflict. I think I was so happy that we got through the difficult section that I didn't notice the signs at first. Her church group continued to help the homeless, and she often spoke on the phone with Gail and made plans. I mentioned Jerry a few times, but she quickly deflected the question and stated that everything was fine. Although I thought it must be difficult to see him every now and then, I backed away as any mention seemed to only upset her. However, when her regular visits to the camp were cut from 30 minutes to sometimes over an hour, I became concerned and suspicious. "Let's go get some ice cream, kids," I announced, receiving a joyful squeal in response. It was Saturday afternoon, and Trish had left an hour earlier for the homeless camp to meet Gail. My curiosity piqued, and I felt justified in checking it out. However, not having kids without a mom meant I needed to come up with a good story. We loaded up, and within 5 minutes we were on the road. After another 10, we reached the camp. Trish's car was nowhere in sight, and with my kids screaming for treats, I was about to head to the ice cream store when a thought struck me. I drove down the street, turned, and soon arrived at the motel where we had stayed that very cold night many months ago. And indeed, my wife's car was parked in front of room number 5. No doubt she was inside with her homeless lover and crying with pleasure as he took her mercilessly. I thought about stopping and kicking down the door to catch her in the act. In my current state, it was an attractive idea, but the children were with me, and I didn't want them to see their mother like that. I took a deep breath as the kids giggled behind me, and we turned around and went to the store and bought ice cream. When we returned home, the children happily ran to their toys, and I was left alone in the living room, trying to comprehend what had happened. Thoughts swirled around in my head, making it difficult to think clearly. I decided I needed to talk to Trish, understand why she chose this path. Maybe we can save our marriage if we can honestly discuss our feelings and experiences. That evening, Trish returned home. I noticed how tired and nervous she was. I invited her to sit down and drink tea. She sat down opposite me, and I saw her eyes avoid my gaze. "We need to talk," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. She nodded, and something flashed in her eyes that I couldn't understand: fear, shame, or something else. "I know about you and Jerry," I said bluntly, watching her reaction. Her face turned pale, and she clenched her hands. "Forgive me," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know what came over me. It was like some kind of cloudiness. I was lost, and Jerry, he was there to comfort me." "But why?" I asked, feeling the pain and anger rising within me. "Why did you do this?" She sighed, trying to calm down. "I felt lonely, lost. You were always busy, always somewhere far away, even when you were nearby. And I needed someone who would listen to me, who would understand." "You could have talked to me," I objected, feeling the resentment trembling in my voice. "I tried, but it didn't work." We moved away from each other, and I didn't know how to get back. Jerry was just a temporary substitute for what I really needed. We sat in silence, digesting what was said. I knew her words were true. We really grew apart, and we were both responsible for it. "What do we do now?" I asked quietly, looking at her. She looked at me, and I saw hope in her eyes. "I want to try again. I want to take back what we had. But for this, we both need to work on our problems, talk to each other, and listen." I nodded, feeling a heaviness squeezing my heart. "It won't be easy, but if we really want to save our family, we have to try." "Okay," I said. "Let's try." From that day, we began the long and difficult journey to rebuilding our marriage. We talked, listened, quarreled, and made up. We learned to understand each other and forgive. Gradually, step by step, we began to rebuild our relationship, and in the end, despite all the difficulties, we again found in each other the love and support that once bound us together. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.